Welcome. This is the October edition of Move to Amend's monthly live stream, the Move to Amend Report. This is the space where you can hear the latest about what's going on in the movement to amend the U.S. Constitution and legalize democracy. And I'm your host, Caitlin Saposi-Belknap. I'm Move to Amend's National Director. And I'm normally joined by one of our board members, Laura Bonham, but she's out of town this week and she'll be back with me next month. So as always, we really encourage your participation as we go along. So if you have any questions to the national team, please make a comment during this live stream and we'll answer your questions in real time. If you're listening to the recording, you can still post questions anytime and we'll go back and make sure they get answered. I want to give a shout out to Garrett, who is helping to answer those questions in the comments, and let me know when they come in and so I can answer them here. Oops, and that reminds me that I should definitely turn on the chat so I can see when he tells me. It looks like I might be able to see some stuff on my phone as well. So any suggestions that you have for improvement, please let us know how these live streams are working for you and we'll make some adjustments. I think we might have got the sound going better this time, I hope, and so let us know if that's the case. And again, right now you can post in the comments wherever you're tuning in from, and Garrett will be posting the links that I reference as I go through and give you updates, and he'll also help with any additional answering of questions. So, hey Catherine, nice to see you. Hope you're doing well too. It's great to see you. And hey Travis from Delaware, and hey Lawrence, and hey Michael. All right, all power to the people. So just a few updates / discussion want to have on some current events like we normally do in the beginning before we get into the update from Move to Amend for the last month. So I want to talk about Puerto Rico because it's been over a month since Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico and basically left the entire island without power and with severe food and water shortages. And despite President Trump's response that his team's handling of the humanitarian crisis was a 10 out of 10, the conditions on the ground are actually telling a really different story, and just want to make sure that folks are seeking out accurate information about what's going on in Puerto Rico and how to help our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico. So 80% of the people on the island still don't have electricity, and residents say it's kind of like taking a step back in time. They've been forced to live in darkness and ration generators. And a lot of people are not even lucky enough to have a generator. Some surgeons have been forced to use cell phones as flashlights during surgery procedures. And so Garrett has some links to some stories about what's actually been going on in Puerto Rico. The Trump administration continues to pat themselves on the back, but 3.4 million Puerto Ricans, almost half of which were already living in poverty before the hurricane, are really struggling to find ways to stay alive. So we want to use this space and in talking to our supporters to make sure to acknowledge the lack of democracy with the United States' relationship with Puerto Rico. The U.S. military invaded the island in 1898, and our country has occupied it since then. Puerto Ricans are actually U.S. citizens, even though they have no representation in Congress, and they have no voting rights in presidential elections. So might give you a sense of why President Trump doesn't seem to be paying much attention to them. So regardless, though, of whether they're U.S. citizens or not, which they are, we have a moral obligation to address any humanitarian crisis that's so close to us, and generally. So unfortunately, right now, the Puerto Rican people are being failed tremendously, and Garrett will post some links with updates, and we'll continue to share updates on our Facebook page and let folks know, and a reminder that seeking out humanitarian organizations who are doing the work without a huge amount of overhead, like the Red Cross, a lot of that money doesn't really go directly to relief, and so looking for organizations where the money that you're wanting to give goes directly to folks who are really in need of it, and not to pay staffers here in the United States a lot of money. So please send more than your prayers to support Puerto Rico. Something else we wanted to touch on in terms of current events is the expansion of corporate so-called rights to deny health care coverage based on religious objections. So the Trump administration has expanded those religious rights for corporations. Basically, they released new rules for the Affordable Care Act, expanding the 2014 Hobby Lobby ruling, which gave corporations the right to deny health care to women based on their supposed constitutional right to religious freedom for corporations. So in that case, the Supreme Court said that closely held corporations, which is a technical term, where the owners and the family are really who owns the company and who operates the company, would be allowed to deny their employees health care based on an argument of religious freedom for corporations. But the Trump administration recently expanded that to apply to all corporations, even publicly traded ones. So they now have a right to deny healthcare coverage based on religious objections. I don't even know. I mean, the absurdity of the situation is kind of beyond the pale. First of all, obviously, how do corporations have religious protections? Supposedly, the whole point of a corporation is that it's separate from the owners. That's the limited liability that is the definition of a corporation. So how is that separation still there when it comes to liability and responsibility, but somehow or other this religious institution, or this corporate institution, is infused with the religious beliefs of those separate owners? So that's one thing. But at least originally the court, had sort of this logic around closely held corporations, but to take it even further now and say all corporations, even publicly traded ones, where presumably the owners might have very different religions, what's the religion of the corporation? How does that even make any sense? So Garrett's going to share a really great Common Dreams article in response to this decision, pointing out a quote from there: expanding so-called corporate citizens' rights deeper into healthcare could ultimately affect everyone, not just women and their access to birth control. Christian scientists are opposed to all kinds of medical treatment, including diabetes, cancer, and meningitis. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in blood transfusions, and there's undoubtedly other religious taboos on medical procedures. So this makes no sense whatsoever. It's a great example of why an amendment that only would overturn Citizens United and reinstate Congress's authority to regulate spending in elections would do nothing to address all of the other corporate constitutional rights that corporations are able to use against us, like apparently now religious freedom that applies to all corporations. So this whole idea gives corporations moral principles, I guess, is the theory. I don't know any corporations who go to church who have the ability to get down on their knees and pray, or have any sort of morality in a higher sense whatsoever. I mean, the logic of this is absurd. So, but women who are actual people, what about our religious freedoms under the Constitution and our right not to be forced to be subjected to the religious beliefs of our employers or their highly suspect moral principles, according to the Trump administration? So when the Hobby Lobby decision came down back in 2014, we pointed out that this could very well happen, that it was sort of a first step and that it could go further. And now we're seeing that it has, and it doesn't even take a Supreme Court decision to do so. So I hope that this really underscores why we absolutely need the We the People amendment. Any amendment short of making clear that only human beings have constitutional rights, no artificial entities like corporations have any constitutional rights. Otherwise, we will continue to be subject to further expansion and contortions of logic in order to expand the ability of wealthy corporations to use the Constitution against the rest of us. So, sorry for that bad news, but it's important to understand where we are. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is the pharmaceutical industry defeated the DEA regulations that would have limited opioid distribution. So a whistleblower from the Drug Enforcement Agency reported details on how pharmaceutical companies were allowed to push hundreds of millions of unregulated opioids with the help of a corrupt Congress. The opiate epidemic has been, in the news a lot lately. It's claimed the lives of over 200,000 people, more than 3 times the number of U.S. military deaths in the Vietnam War. And during the height of the epidemic, Big Pharma, which is big drug and pharmaceutical companies, were still able to handily defeat any attempt at regulation to slow down opioid use. So this is how much the deck is stacked in favor of corporations. As we suspected all along, the greed of the industry was deliberate, and the actions of these companies show that their goal was to make as much money as possible, and they didn't care who died because of it. And how many times do we have stories like that? So as the whistleblower said, these kids weren't slinging crack on the corner. These were professionals who were doing it. They were just drug dealers in lab coats. So Garrett's going to post a link to a full Washington Post article that's on our website about this. And I actually happened to watch South Park recently, and their new episode is about this. So hopefully this will start to get out, but another reason for why we absolutely need the We the People Amendment so that we can put large pharmaceutical companies in check when we find out that they're doing things like this, or before they even get a chance to. And then the last thing is that here in California, everyone's probably heard that we experienced some really horrific wildfires earlier this month, causing 40 deaths, and tens of thousands of people's homes have been destroyed and businesses. This is already in a very in a housing market that has extreme shortages. So the ramifications of these fires and the homes that burn down is going to go well beyond, the rest of this year. And the intensity and the swiftness of the fires, we've never seen anything like that before. It was a really windy night, and it's been incredibly dry here in California due to drought and climate change conditions. And even the wind itself was odd and unusual. And now investigations are showing that likely negligence on the part of the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, which is our monopoly electric company here in California, the maintenance of their power lines or lack of maintenance of their power lines might have been the initial start of the fires. So, and this wouldn't be the first time that PG&E has been responsible for damages due to preventable problems. The San Bruno fire from several years ago was another example of this, where they basically fail to maintain the way that they're supposed to, their power lines and things like that. So another aspect of corporate rule and exploitation not really being talked about is the fact that hundreds of those fighting the fires on the front lines are paid $1 per hour for their work. These are folks who are actually incarcerated and in prison and participating in a program that only pays prison inmates around $1 per hour for very dangerous work. So the 13th Amendment prohibits slavery, that you can't do work without being paid. It leaves a big loophole, though, for people who are convicted of crimes to be forced into labor. And oftentimes for the benefit of for-profit corporations who are allowed to own private prisons. So there's a lot of connections here. PG&E, a corporation, potentially helping to cause conditions that started some of the worst so far wildfires we've ever seen in this state, and then also a number of people doing really heroic work to put those fires out, and regardless of past crimes, we still should be paying people for their labor. So that's a lot going on this month. It was kind of an intense October here in California. But let's turn now to highlights from this month. And so, let's see, I'm just going to take a quick peek. It looks like there's been a couple comments on things I've said, but I don't see any questions. So, Garrett, please let me know if there are any in the chat, because I'm not looking down at my phone regularly. So pledge to amend. It's election season. It's almost over, actually. Those of you who pay attention to municipal, local elections, which I hope is everyone, know that it has been election season. So Pledge to Amend is our campaign to get candidates to take a position on the amendment and on corporate constitutional rights and money in politics when running for office, to let voters know where they stand, even if they're not running for Congress or state legislatures, which obviously have a direct influence on whether the We the People amendment will pass. We also target municipal elected officials as well for a couple different reasons. One, this issue should matter to anyone who wants to be a leader in government. And then also, of course, those who run for local office are actually the ones who are most likely to run for state office and ultimately potentially federal office. And so starting early with our elected leaders or our wannabe elected leaders is important to make sure that this issue is one that they understand, that they're clear that they need to take a position on. And then the next piece of Pledge to Amend is to let voters know where the candidate stands so that we can vote accordingly. So we're still taking pledges from candidates to amend. Garrett will post the link to the Pledge to Amend page where you can find out if candidates for office in your community have taken the pledge. And want to give a shout out to folks in Minnesota who have been doing a lot of good work to get city councilors and school board folks to take the pledge. As I was looking through who's on that list, I saw a lot of folks from Minnesota, Ohio, California. So shout out to our volunteer organizers who have been doing good work to put this issue in front of candidates in your communities. And if you know somebody running for office, make sure that they take a position and take the Pledge to Amend. We've also launched a campaign to ask folks to hold house parties in support of Move to Amend between now and the end of the year. So a house party would mean that you invite your friends and neighbors to join you at your home. And you could do that as a Halloween party. There's still time, but a holiday party would work as well, or just any party. An opportunity to come together, help folks know about Move to Amend. If you want, you could show our 30-minute film, Legalize Democracy. That's an introduction to Move to Amend, and we have discussion questions you could use, or you could just have a general conversation. We even would be able to potentially Skype in somebody from our national team to answer questions if you have the technology to do that. So please think or neighbors or both who you would like to know, you would like them to know about Move to Amend, then we would love you to hold a party. And if you want, we would also be happy to invite all the Move to Amend petition signers in your area as well, so an opportunity to meet new people. So please think about holding a house party. You don't have to have a fancy house. You don't have to have a fancy party. Any gathering of people would be fine for us. So let us know if you need any help with that, and Garrett will post the link to the page on our site where you can get all the information for how to get started, and we give you templates for invites and ideas for what to do in terms of programming and food and more. So please be thinking about holding a house party, and if for some reason doing it before the end of the year just really wouldn't work for you, then we'd be happy to have you host a house party in the new year as well. And let's see, October was big for us at Move to Amend because we had our national team all come together here in Sacramento, California. This was all of our staff and board to talk about our plans for 2018 and assess how we're doing this year. So want to make sure to let everybody know that we're at 51 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives for the We the People Amendment, which is huge because our goal for this year was 35, and we ended last year with, I think it was 24, when our goal was 25. So we didn't make our goal last year, but then this year, not only did we get, past our 35, we also actually blew past next year's goal, which is 45. And now we're at 51. So we'll see if we can get any more before the end of the year, but that was something that we were really pleased about and celebrated when we all came together for our board meeting, and talked about how a lot of the reason why that has happened was because of our leadership summit that we held, the first ever National Leadership Summit last year in Washington, D.C., and had a lobby day, did a lot of training for a lot of our volunteers who had never lobbied before, and that momentum carried through into this year. And as a result, we have, so many co-sponsors in the House. So that's all very exciting. And to that end, we will be doing our next Leadership Summit next year in June. We don't have the exact dates yet, but those will be coming to you soon. And we're actually going to open it up. So the first one was only open to folks who are active leaders in Move to Amend, but we'd be happy to have prospective leaders now come too. So it'll be open, it'll be in Washington, D.C., it'll be a weekend in early June, and we're working on securing the venue now, but it'll be an amazing conference. A lot of people told us that it was the best conference they'd ever been to. And we expect this next one to be just as exciting, just as good, just as rich in the programming. So that'll be a big part of what we have planned for next year. We also will be doing a lot of barnstorming and outreach. We've kind of staffed up in our outreach area over the course of this year, and we'll be adding actually a couple more folks to our staff team. So we'll be looking for a legislative coordinator who will be based in the DC area, and we'll be doing these hires before the end of the year. And then a outreach coordinator to kind of handle all the logistics for our speaking tours, of which we're going to be doing at least one a month, if not two a month next year. There are a number of us who will be doing those now, and so we need somebody to do all the coordination, and that person will be based here in Sacramento. So if you have any ideas for folks to be looking on our website, as we've got new positions coming up, and that'll be exciting because we'll be able to focus on those areas even more than we have currently been able to. So that's some of the stuff that we've got coming up for next year. We also are looking at our caucuses and making some changes, adding an educator's caucus. So if you know of anybody who is an educator of any variety, elementary school up to college, we'll be putting together a caucus of folks who want to do Move to Amend work as teachers. And we already have a labor caucus and an interfaith caucus and an arts and culture caucus. And so talked about goals for those for next year and reaching out to those constituencies even more. And we'll be sending out, kind of as we go through to the end of the year, we'll be sending more details about what you can expect in 2018. But that's a couple of the highlights coming fresh off of the meeting. And let's see what else. Oh, we're also currently in a push to get letters to the editor in local papers in calling on senators to introduce the We the People Amendment in the U.S. Senate. It is a goal this year to have the amendment introduced in the Senate. So far, we don't have any Senate champions, although we've made some progress on in conversations. But we are still looking to secure that Senate introduction. So one of the things that we want to pivot and do, besides the meetings that we've been holding on the national level, and a lot of our affiliates have been meeting with their senators, but to kind of take it up a notch, what we're asking everyone to do is get letters to the editor printed in local or state papers, calling on your senator by name. And they have staff members whose job it is to, find any time that their boss is in the paper. And so they will certainly see these letters. It's a great way to get their attention. So I submitted one to the Sacramento Bee yesterday, asking Kamala Harris to become our champion, one of our California senators. We'll see what happens with that Sacramento Bee letter. But Garrett will post the link to where you can sign up to send a letter, and then we'll send you an email with tips and example, and then also be happy to talk through with you any help that you might need. So please be thinking of that, especially if you live in one of our target states. where senators have shown some interest, and we maybe just need a little bit more attention on them to put them over the top. So that would be California, Washington, Oregon, Ohio, Minnesota, Montana, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. So if you live in any of those states, then we really need you to send a letter to the editor. But regardless of what state you live in, even if you don't think that your senator is somebody who's likely to take the lead, there's no reason to let any of them off the hook, right? So we want to work on them until they tell us no, and then we want to work on them until they tell us maybe. And if they still say it maybe, then we want to work on getting somebody else in their seat who's going to say yes. So there's no nobody who shouldn't do this. If you can, and it doesn't take too long. Most letters are only allowed to be 250 words. Mine had to be 150 to the Sacramento Bee, so that's a really short little bit of writing, and we can help you out. So I want to give a few affiliate shout-outs. Affiliates and volunteers in Minnesota's state network have been on a roll asking their state and federal and local candidates to sign the pledge to amend, as I already mentioned. So good work to all of them. And I hear that they're having a huge November house party to celebrate their good work over the course of the year. So way to go, everyone in Minnesota, one of our strongest states. Ohio affiliates have been scheduling visits with Senator Sherrod Brown and working on him to get the We the People amendment introduced in the Senate, and also working on getting their state legislators to support a state resolution to make Ohio the 20th state to call for Congress to amend the Constitution. So way to go, folks in Ohio. And moving on to looking into November, next month. So we're closing out the end of the year. Like I said, we will be doing some new hires. So I hope that folks will keep an eye out for that. If you know of anybody who has skills in either lobbying and legislative and communications work, that'll be a joint position. And then also in coordination and logistics and event planning. And that person needs to live here in the Sacramento area. And the other person, we're really hoping will live in D.C. or somewhere on the Eastern Seaboard that they could get to D.C. regularly and affordably. So that's two things. But then also we are looking for bright, energetic folks to join our spring 2018 intern team. And interns telecommute from anywhere in the United States, so you don't have to be close by us. And in fact, one of our interns is, she actually is a Sacramento native, but she goes to school in London, so she's doing her internship now that school has started in London, so it could be anywhere. Interns are a critical part of Move to Amend's infrastructure and get plugged into serious organizing work, get a lot of really great experience. Our interns definitely don't just make copies and data entry. So the deadline to apply for the spring cycle, which begins in January, I believe, is November 24th is the deadline to apply. So Garrett will post the link to learn more information about the internship program and the application to apply to participate. So if you know of anybody who would be good, then please pass along that link. And then we had a really good barnstorming tour through Ohio at the end of September into October. Laura and George, two of our board members, traveled through the state, and Greg Coleridge, our outreach director, traveled with them for some of it. Greg is leaving tomorrow to do a barnstorming tour in Pennsylvania and Delaware. So good luck, Greg, on that trip. And I'll be in Oregon in the beginning of December. And then we're looking at some of the first places where we'll be going in the new year are Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama in February. But like I said, we'll be doing at least one, if not two, barnstorming tours most months in the new year. So we'll be posting that schedule soon. There's also a link that Garrett will post where if you'd like to bring a speaker to your town, you can let us know. So that's my report for October, and I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have or respond to any comments. So let me know if you do. Let's see. Michael Huff, is this an Article 5 movement? So assuming that you're talking about Article 5 of the Constitution, and for folks who don't know what that is, that's Article 5 actually is the whole part of the Constitution where amending it is talked about. So technically, yes, anytime you're talking about amending the Constitution, it's an Article 5 movement. But I think you're talking about a convention, I'm going to guess. So one of the ways to amend the Constitution is a convention of the states, where states can propose amendments, and then 2/3 of the states' delegates would need to approve those amendments, and then they'd needed to be sent to 3/4 of the state legislatures to ratify them. The other way to amend the Constitution is for 2/3 of both houses of Congress to pass an amendment, and then still 3/4 of the states would need to ratify that. So our strategy is actually we're kind of open to either option. There's pros and cons with both. So as I talked about, I think your question came in earlier. So obviously our amendment, and talking about our House Joint Resolution 48, which is our amendment in the House. So obviously one thing that we are doing is working on getting Congress to pass our amendment, and that's sort of the first option, the option that most Americans are more familiar with in terms of amending the Constitution, because that's how it's been done before. So we are working on that. However, we recognize that a couple things about the state convention option. One is that sometimes for an amendment, maybe one particularly like ours, where Congress is maybe the least likely to get on board with changing the way that they finance their elections, because the folks who are already in office have already been able to use the system as it is to make it work for them. And so what is their incentive to really make a shift? So they might drag their feet quite a bit. So a convention, or even a threat of a state's convention, can sometimes be what's necessary to get Congress to actually act. And we've seen that happen before in amendments before, where states begin to say, if you're not going to do this, Congress, then we will, and start to have the momentum towards a convention of the states, and that is what's necessary to make Congress respond. So that might be a piece that we would need to put into this mix, is at least a threat of a convention. But also, amending the Constitution through a convention of the states is a more directly democratic way to go about amending the Constitution versus Congress. There are more people involved, there's more of a discussion, and it's more participatory. It would be delegates chosen by state legislatures, but still, that's more directly connected to the public and the people. We have more of a say over who is in state legislatures than we do in Congress, with big money at play. So we wouldn't want to take off the table the most democratic way that we have currently to amend the Constitution. So that's another reason why we also think that it might be necessary that we go that route. And then the last piece in the mix, though, is that while it may be more democratic, it also has the potential for other conversations to come into the state constitutional convention discussion, conversations that would maybe move us backwards as a country, taking away rights from people, discriminating against people, xenophobia, homophobia, all of the currents that are at play in a real hateful way in politics in this country right now. And so we certainly wouldn't want a convention of the states to lead us in that direction in any way. So our position is, in order to be successful, we need to build a people's movement, because it will take a people's movement, a massive, organized, disciplined, cohesive people's movement in order to force Congress to act. And it will also take that same level of movement, energy, momentum, and organization to be successful having a constitutional convention that would lead us, in a democratic direction versus backwards. And so that's what we need to do. That's the work that we are doing. And that kind of decision about whether the amendment should ultimately happen through Congress or through a convention isn't one that we really need to decide on now. We need to be powerful enough for both to be successful. And there's a lot of disagreement about whether Article 5 convention would be a good idea. And so we want to openly talk about that because there's good points on both sides. There's pros and cons, like I said. So that was kind of a longer answer, but it's a question that comes up a lot. And there's a answer for kind of where we stand on it that's more concise on our website. So maybe, Garrett, you could post the link to the frequently asked questions where we talk about what our position is on Convention of the States. I see that Michael Greenman posted about the Interfaith Caucus. He's a member, so you all can see that in the comments. If you're interested in getting involved with the Interfaith Caucus, you can do that through Michael. There's also a page on our site on the Interfaith Caucus. Garrett, if you have a chance to maybe just paste the caucuses page in general for any of the caucuses I mentioned, Labor, Arts and Culture, Interfaith, and the Educators Caucus, which is forming. You don't have to post individual links for the caucuses, but just the one where people can see all of them and then go to the ones that they're interested in. That would be great. So I'm not seeing any other questions, but I'd be happy to stick around for a little bit longer if people have them. So any more questions or comments, please let us know, post it. And I'll take a minute to sort of see here. It looks like there's some discussion that's happening on the Article 5 convention. That's cool. I don't need to jump in the middle of that. Looks like y'all are talking to each other, which is great. I'm not seeing any questions. So I'll give it another minute or so to make sure that nobody's busy typing their question and they sign off too soon. So while we're waiting to just check and see if there's anything else, I'll remind everybody that this live report is normally on the fourth Wednesday of every month. Next month, it'll actually be on the fifth Wednesday, though, because the fourth Wednesday is the day before Thanksgiving, and we figure folks will be with family. I'll be busy, so we're going to do it on November 29th, so it'll be a different day. But it'll be the same time, and we always post it here on Facebook, so we'll send an email out as well. But as soon as you see that link that Garrett posts about a week in advance saying that we're going to be doing our next live report, go ahead and click the button that says send me updates, so that way you'll get a notification right in Facebook once we go live. Looks like I do have a question from Michael. Do we have available a handout describing the amendment with the names of sponsors that can be updated periodically? We don't have it as a handout just because it frequently changes, but what you can do is go to that movetoamend.org/amendment link, and you can find it there. And actually, it looks like Kian's saying that maybe there is a handout that I'm not aware of. Keon will post the link. So maybe we do. Maybe one of our staff has put that together and I haven't even seen it yet. Let's see. Who am I? Walter is asking. I am articulate and knowledgeable. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you think so. I moved to Amend's National Director. My name is Caitlin. And you can see more about me on our staff page if you like, along with all of our other staff. But I'm not a lawyer, but I have debated enough lawyers that I could fake it, and especially on this topic, but sometimes more. And my background is in political science, And I also was an elected official locally in my community for 12 years on our water district board, so got a lot of experience with politics and governance that way as well. And yeah, thanks for the question. Happy to meet you, Walter. Anyone else have anything you want to say? Any questions? Happy to take them before we sign off. Otherwise, we'll let you go. But again, we'll be back here on November 29th again. And if you're not listening to the live video, but you're listening to the recording, you can post questions and we'll respond as soon as we can on our Facebook page. So we will not leave you hanging, even if you weren't able to join us live. Let's see, Travis, did I maybe miss your question? Still waiting on response from a couple of my legislators going to talk to another one's assistant, please. Okay, good. When you said still waiting, I was afraid that you were still waiting on me. But that's great. Thanks. I'm forgetting what state you live in, although I know that I know this. Delaware, maybe? Thank you for doing the work to reach out to your legislators. And again, anybody who hasn't contacted your representative, maybe Garrett, you could just post the general link for the amendment page so that folks can see. There's a place for you to send an email to your legislators, but in all honesty, making a phone call makes much bigger difference. So at a minimum, send that email, but using our action link, but it would be great if you would make a phone call to both of your senators and then whoever your House representative is, if they're not already yet a co-sponsor. So I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to sign off and let you all get to dinner. If you're on the West Coast like me, and probably if you're on the East Coast, you've already eaten. So thanks for joining me tonight. It was great to have all of you here. Thanks for your really good questions and discussion. And again, I hope you'll come back on November 29th. If you haven't signed the Move to Amend petition yet, please do that. That'll help you get updates from us. And also, that petition is really important. We take that whenever we go to speak to legislators and let them know how many of their constituents are calling on them to support the amendment. So a super great thing that you could do, and everybody can do, is go ahead and share the movetoamend.org/motion link to all your friends and ask them to sign up as well so that we can bolster up our numbers and let our representatives know that their constituents want to see them support this amendment. So thanks, everybody. Thank you very much, Garrett and Keon, for helping field questions and respond to folks. And have a great night, and we'll see you again on November 29th, if not before. All right. Take care, everybody, and I will talk to you next time.